Said, my name's Cris Beswick. I've been in this space, I suppose, for about 25 years now. I'm an ex-designer. So design and design thinking, creativity, all of the things that CEDIM is known for are at the very heart of what I used to do in the first part of my career and what I do now in terms of working with senior teams and big corporates on how to lead and build a culture of innovation. So I want to share with you some of the things that I know to be true, and some of the things that I believe need to be true in terms of how we should and need to lead organizations, especially where innovation is the core focus, and some observations on things that I think we need to start doing as leaders if we genuinely want to build innovation capability, and even more if we want to build cultures of innovation inside our organizations. So the first thing is, Patricio mentioned there, building a culture of innovation. I've written a couple of books and I've contributed to, I don't know, probably maybe a dozen books over the past decade that other authors have written, and where they've asked me to contribute and write chapters and inform their thinking. So I've written 2 books of my own and contributed to about a dozen. What I'm going to talk to you about today is primarily lessons learned through the work that I do around building a culture of innovation, and primarily the thinking that went into this book. So this is one of the best-selling books on innovation culture, and there's lots of books on innovation and why we need to innovate and strategy and things like that, but it's very difficult to find books specifically around how we build a culture of innovation. And this was the best-selling book on Amazon at one point. Don't know whether it still is, but it certainly informed the thinking of hundreds, even thousands of corporate leaders around the world. And it's some of the thinking that went into this book that I want to share with you today. One of the things that's really important to still understand is, despite all of the focus on innovation, specifically over the past 5 to 10 years, and despite all of the claims of big organizations around the world that innovation's right at the heart of what they do and they have a culture of innovation, the reality is, when we look at the data from global surveys, this one's from the Conference Board, less than 10% of leaders are extremely satisfied with their organization's ability to innovate. And in a world that we have to operate in, and specifically as we've seen over the last 18 months, a pandemic-focused world, the need for that genuine ability to innovate and create and design new things, whether they be products, solutions, experiences, business models, that need has never been more so, especially at big, complex corporate level. And I think one of the challenges is, when we talk about culture, there's this famous quote by Peter Drucker that many of you may know: "Culture eats strategy for breakfast." And I believe Drucker was absolutely right when the world was much more predictable and much more linear. So let's go back to a time about 12, 13 years ago, just before Lehman Brothers crashed. So September the 15th, 2008. I think Drucker's quote, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast," was absolutely apt pre-Lehman Brothers, before we had that crash, because the world was more predictable and it was a lot more linear than it is today. The challenge, I think, with Drucker's quote still having currency today is that the world just isn't as linear or predictable as it was 10, 12 years ago. And I think we need to reframe Drucker's quote, and I'll give you my contemporary version of Drucker's "Culture eats strategy for breakfast" at the end of my slide, something to leave you with and think about in terms of how you think about your businesses. So I want to share with you what I know about leadership, and specifically leading for innovation and leading for a culture of innovation. And most of my work boils down to 2 things. It boils down to working with CEOs and leadership teams around the world on how they build innovation ecosystems innovation capability, and ultimately a culture of innovation inside their organization. And then the second part is helping them understand how to build that culture and building roadmaps for the transformation that moving to a culture of innovation requires. So leadership and culture. My business partner, some of you may know, a guy called Dan Tomer. Dan wrote The Corporate Startup, a book that many of you may know about, and he's now just written Innovation Accounting, again, one of the books that I've contributed to. And between Dan and I, we help those senior teams with the strategy, leadership, and culture required for innovation. But I want to talk to you today specifically about the key things that leaders need to do and that leadership requires when innovation's a core requirement, and certainly when building a culture of innovation is an aspiration for an organization. And the first thing we need to do as leaders is accept that turmoil is now a part of what we need to deal with on a day-to-day basis. Going back to my pre-Lehman Brothers time, turmoil and the kinds of global radical shifts that we've seen with the global pandemic, they were few and far between 10, 15 years ago. What we now need to understand is and take on board is that turmoil is a fundamental part of the way we live and the way we operate businesses. But that turmoil isn't to be seen as a negative. Turmoil and situations like the pandemic are there to be seen as opportunities to change and to evolve and to design new solutions and to change, and to make things better, to shape the future out of those periods of turmoil and those what are normally considered negative circumstances. So out of adversity, right, comes triumph. The second point I'd like you to consider, and all of these slides have really one key word on that I want you to focus on. And the second word is wicked. And as designers, we talk about wicked problems. And the reality is wicked problems are becoming more and more abundant. And the impact and the significance of the challenges that we've been asked to face as organizations, take decarbonisation as a perfect example with COP26, the conference that's happening in the UK at the moment, where all the global leaders have flown into Glasgow for a conference around how we start to save the planet, around decarbonisation and shifting to a more sustainable future. These are wicked problems. And as business leaders, innovation is the key, and design is the key, and creativity is the key that will help us solve those wicked problems. And what I say is wicked problems merely require wicked solutions. And innovation is about the ability and the capability to create wicked solutions to wicked problems. And as leaders, we need to put that at the heart of our organizations. One of the phrases that you may well have heard, and this comes up time and time again in my work with CEOs and very senior leaders, is the term Vuca. And the term Vuca, if you don't know, was originally coined, created by the American military to try and describe the environment that the military operates in. And the definition of Vuca is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. The challenge with leadership is, and leading for an organization where innovation is a core requirement, is the atmosphere that you create as a leader determines the output and determines the culture and the atmosphere that everyone else in the organization lives and breathes by. What I mean by that is, if you as a leader perceive the world and view the world as volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, your behavior as a leader and what you portray as a leader and your actions and your words as a leader will be guided by that subconscious view that you believe this is the world that you're being asked to operate in. So as leaders, we've got to flick and we've got to switch from a negative context to a positive context. And that's all about mindset. That's about understanding and embracing the things that innovation requires and the things that growth requires. and the mindset that creating and shaping the future requires. And I think it comes down to this. This is what I teach leaders around the world to do. We shift from volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous to a leadership mindset around being visionary, unbounded, curious, and authentic. So we reshape Vuca from a negative to a positive context. And I think that mindset and that shift from negative to positive is one of the core things around having a growth mindset and a future shaping mindset that predetermines how much innovation we're able to drive out of our organizations as leaders. The next thing I want you to consider from a leadership perspective is your level of ambition as a leader. And there's a phrase that says leaders get the innovation that they deserve. And what that means is, as a leader, you have to want innovation in your organization. You have to consciously want to drive innovation in your organization. And in part, that means being really ambitious and shifting away from the traditional view of organizations and strategy specifically that says, let's create a 2-3 year plan, even a 5-year plan at best, but let's create a plan based on what we know about the past and what we think we're going to achieve over the next 2 or 3 years. And the challenge with that traditional strategy cycle is it doesn't allow enough for adaptation and iteration along the way. The traditional approach to strategy is we create a strategy, we agree on it, and then for the next 3 years, the company or all our team are in implementation mode, rolling out that strategy. What we teach leaders to do, and a lot of my focus is on helping teams be way, way more ambitious about the strategic reach that they think they have, and the timelines that they think they should think about. So we go way past 2-3 years, and right up to 10 years, and even longer. And that's not to say that how do we know that much about the future, and how can we predict what's going to happen? But it's not about predicting what's going to happen. It's about building a level of ambition about what you want to try and achieve and the future that you want to shape. And then the key then is to bring it back to today, and then iteratively figure out how, in a human-centered and a hypothesis-driven way, we start to move forward in pursuit of that strategy. And the hypothesis bit is about testing assumptions about how far we can confidently predict what's going to happen in the world, or what's going to happen in our market, or what's going to happen with our customers or customer segments, and build a strategy for that timeline. And if that's 6 months or 12 months, then so be it. But at every step of the way, like we do with design and like we do with innovation, we're testing that hypothesis. And we're building comfort in the fact that if we need to switch or pivot or change direction slightly, that hypothesis will give us the direction in which we need to pivot or change. And it's just a different way of looking at strategy from the traditional way of deciding on a direction and then only moving in that direction for a given amount of time. And flow is something that's really important to my work. Flow is about state of mind and having and being in what psychologists call a positive flow, or a positive state of mind. And that really aligns to what I shared with you a minute ago about the whole approach to Vuca and having a positive growth mindset that's predicated on the fact that you believe you have the capability and your organization has the ability to shape the future. And flow and mindset are really key things. This has become even more important given the last 18 months in terms of the pandemic, given the mental health of many people, specifically leaders and senior people in very, very high stress, high demand positions, but not just them, ordinary average people who may have lost their job and then, and through the pandemic been put into situations which has had a negative psychological or mental effect on them. So staying positive and being in that positive state of mind, that the right flow, is really important if you want to portray the kind of behavior and mindset that leading for innovation requires. A key thing for me as a leader is purpose. And a great example of someone that's purpose-driven is this guy on screen, Elon Musk. And he was interviewed a while ago about what his purpose was and why he was running an organization or several organizations, and why he wasn't specifically focused on revenue. And his answer was really simple, and it's a really inspiring reply. And he basically said, if it was about the money, I'd have started another internet business. And we all know from his background that that's where he made his money. But he has a different purpose. Some call him eccentric, some say he's absolutely crazy. But the reality is, as a leader, he's very clear on his purpose, and he's driven by pursuing that purpose. And what none of us can deny at the moment is the success that he's having, with that real focus on purpose. And as a leader, that focus on purpose is really, really important. And I've got a question for you all, something for you to take away and reflect on around purpose at the end. This whole program and this whole webinar and this whole conversation, hosted by CEDIM, is ironically about creativity and design, etc. And one of the things we know about leaders and about leadership is that the majority of leaders now absolutely understand that creativity is one of, if not the most important leadership capability and leadership trait for surviving and thriving and driving growth in the world that we now have to operate in. In an innovation-focused world, understanding creativity is really important. But here's the key thing for leaders. This isn't about leaders being creative and saying to leaders, you must now be a creative. What it's about from a leadership perspective is simply about leaders understanding creativity and understanding how creativity works and understanding the importance of creativity in terms of forming the right culture and driving innovation. And it's a really key lesson, because a lot of leaders that I work with, before I work with them, their presumption is that the world is asking them to become creative, and that's not the case. What is important for leaders, though, is two things. What I've already mentioned, purpose, and I've just mentioned creativity. What I think happens at the intersection of purpose and creativity is this word on the bottom, which is really important for leaders: curiosity. When we're curious as human beings, it makes us want to explore more. It makes us want to ask more questions. It makes us want to find out things, because curiosity is about questions and wanting to answer things that you don't know the answer to, or wanting to find out things that you're curious about. And when we're curious as leaders, it makes us want to explore more. And when we explore more, we experiment more. When we experiment more, we start to understand the value of risk and taking risk in order to satisfy that curiosity. And exploration, experimentation, and risk are three of the key things that organizational cultures require in order to drive and deliver innovation, and in order to build a culture of innovation. And when we as leaders understand those three components, it makes it far easier for us to lead a culture of innovation. And the next thing I want to talk about is environment. Now, this has been a real challenge throughout the past 18 months because of the COVID pandemic. Almost all of us around the world have been sent home from offices and from our places of education, etc., etc. And we've been required to work from home, many of us in isolation. And the challenge is creativity and innovation have needed to be sustained throughout this whole period, and in many cases have needed to increase. The challenge with innovation and creativity from my perspective is working from home and not working physically with other people is all right when you're doing your day job, when you're keeping the wheels of the business turning and keeping the business operational and doing the job that many of us need to do in order to just run the day-to-day operational and functional things that our businesses need to do. However, when it comes to innovation, when it comes to solving problems, when it comes to creativity, I'm a firm believer that that is a team sport. Creativity with people versus in isolation, and physically with people versus doing it on Zoom or remotely is fundamentally different. The vibe that we get and the way that we riff off each other, the way that we interact with each other, the conversations we have, and the things that we hear when other people are talking about things, and we hear and we pick up on something and we say, hey guys, that thing you've just talked about, I just overheard you were saying something. I've got some ideas on that. That's made me think in a different way. That's made me think about how I could help you solve that. All of those things require us to be physically together. And it's just not the same when we try and do that in a remote way. So I think physically being together in a creative and inspiring environment is absolutely key. And for me, this is what the whole movement to hybrid working is probably going to be about. I think we'll do our day-to-day jobs remotely, and maybe we're continuing to work from home. But I think when businesses need us to be creative and innovative, that's when we'll go back into the office, or that's when we'll meet somewhere together collectively as a team to creatively work together. And collaboration is absolutely key. We all know that collaboration is fundamental to innovation. What we need to do as leaders is foster greater collaboration within our organizations, and that means flattening structures, breaking down silos, putting really diverse teams together. But what we also need to do is really drive the human-centered nature that creativity and innovation requires. So that means collaborating more with customers, not just presenting customers with solutions when we've come up with them and seeing whether, and co-creating solutions with customers. I'm talking about even what I call co-unearthing with customers, i.e. before we've even started, before we even know what a problem is, how do we collaborate with customers to unearth problems and unearth opportunities? And then we need to collaborate much more extensively with other companies in different sectors. And we've seen how different sectors which traditionally would never have been considered competitors are now being considered competitors in sectors that they've never traditionally operated in. We've seen the disruption to the hotel industry by what essentially is an app-based organization. Yeah. So, you can now book a room on an app, and that simple technology-based solution to helping people get accommodation around the world is something that Airbnb have pioneered. The hotel industry would never have disrupted itself in that way. We've seen the same thing with the taxi industry, with Uber. So we need to collaborate across industries and across different industries to create multiple or really multidisciplinary solutions. And a real key thing for me is, as a leader, our job really is to make sure that we build an environment where people absolutely love what we do, why we do it, and how we do it. Some of these words are really soft, and they're perceived as not the hard things that leaders are about. Well, unfortunately, my job is to tell you that words like love is absolutely what leadership is about, right? One thing we can't do with our employees is we can't contractually force them to be creative. We can't contractually force them to innovate for us. They do what I call, they willingly contribute creativity. They willingly contribute passion. They willingly contribute the real, the drive to solve customer problems and make our organizations better and make the world better. They only do that. People only willingly contribute that stuff when they absolutely love the business. They love who they're working for. They love colleagues. They love culture. So although it sounds soft, love is an absolutely core component of what leading for a culture of innovation is about. And in order to do that as a leader, I think ownership is really key. And what I mean by that is, think about as a leader, if you say that innovation is really important to your organization, and as a leader, if you're constantly talking about the need to build a culture of innovation, as a leader, what does it really, really mean to own the innovation agenda? So think about that as a leader. What does real ownership of the innovation agenda really feel like? What does it look like? And if you can answer that question and you then start delivering against that, you're on the right path to building a culture of innovation. So I said I'd share with you right at the start my contemporary view of what I think Drucker's original quote, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast," should look like in 2021 and beyond. And I believe if you want to shape the future, strategy, leadership, and culture need to eat breakfast together. Strategy is now more important than ever, and that strategic ambition, purpose-led strategic, approach to strategy is key. Leading for innovation is absolutely key, and that requires new mindset and new behavior from us as leaders. And organizational culture is absolutely key, just as key as it was when Drucker made his quote. But I think in a non-linear world, in a less predictable world, strategy, leadership, and culture need to be blended together. They need to eat breakfast together in order to drive growth and drive innovation in organizations. So I have 3 questions for you to take away. And this really is about owning the innovation agenda. And by the way, all these slides, if you speak to the CEDIM guys, a PDF of these slides will all be made available. You can have that and use that as you wish. So don't frantically try and take notes of these 3 questions. But as a leader, someone who wants to lead for a culture of innovation, here's my 3 questions. The first one is, an innovation strategy is about the pursuit of better, right? It's about saying, how do we shape the future? How do we make the world better? How do we make what we do better? And so is purpose. Purpose is about making the world better. It's about saying, my purpose is, and I believe we can do better. I believe we can make the world better. I believe we can change things. And here's the purpose that drives that. So my question is, as an organization and as a leader, do you genuinely have an innovation strategy? And what I mean by that is, do you have a bespoke, specific innovation strategy with an innovation thesis, with an antithesis, and with a strategy around with a culture that you'll need in order to build innovation as a core capability? What I don't mean is, do you have innovation as a word in your traditional standard corporate strategy? So do you have an innovation strategy? Is your purpose absolutely clear? And are both of those aligned? Have a think about that. The second one is, building a culture of innovation is a choice, right? It's a conscious leadership decision. You have to say as a leader, we need a culture of innovation. It's absolutely imperative. And as a leader, I am going to consciously build that culture, and I'm going to do everything required to build that culture. So think about your actions and your behavior as a leader, and what are you currently choosing to do? And this question really is about what you're subconsciously doing and versus what you are consciously doing. And what I mean by that is, have a sense check about whether you are actually subconsciously maintaining the status quo or maintaining the current way you do things? Or are you consciously disrupting the way you do things, changing the way you do things? And are you consciously choosing to shape the future? And the third question I have is, you can't, as a leader, influence results. You can't guarantee that something will happen. What you can do is you can influence behavior and you can influence processes. And it's the behavior and the processes which in turn lead to the desired outcomes that we all want as leaders and businesses. So ask yourself this question: will your current culture and the ecosystem that surrounds your whole business allow you to shape the future? Is it the right culture and is it the right innovation ecosystem required for shaping and building the future that you want as a business? And if your answer to question 3 isn't, then build a strategy for changing it. That's all I've got to share with you today. I hope that was really useful. So thank you from me. There's some details on the screen there if you want to find out more about what me and my team do at Outcome. Connect with me on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter. And if you have any questions, I'm sure I will do my best to answer them in the time that we have left. Thank you.